everyone, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies, and we're focusing today on cost for our estimating components, and of course we'll touch on creating estimating templates, cost books, working within those cost books to create a solid estimate or accurate estimate for projects. And then we're going to take that estimate information and we're going to turn it into some wonderful proposals, excellent reports like material lists or bid request packages. We'll even be able to generate some contracts or spec sheets as well. Because this is going to be our focus today, this one will probably be a little bit more detail heavy than yesterday's. Yesterday we talked about setting up a lot of the information for ConstructionSuite like contacts and projects. Today we're going to kind of build on some of this information to give you guys, once again, a lot of the depth and the pricing information that you would typically need for your jobs. And we're going to be using, again, the time today to cover specifically estimating and reports. Of course, this information is going to carry through tomorrow's webinar, to dive into some of the QuickBooks integration. Everything that we're looking at on the estimate side should carry over to QuickBooks at the click of a button, so I'll talk about that a little bit today, much more detail tomorrow. And of course, what you're putting together today can also benefit the scheduling system that we're going to be taking a look at on Thursday. Now, keep that in mind as we go through this. I'll answer some of those questions as they come up, but I'll definitely be talking about those in more detail as we dive into the specific QuickBooks integration features tomorrow and scheduling, syncing, and capabilities there on Thursday. For today, though, like I mentioned, we're going to be working on estimates and contracts and reports. And to begin with, most of the information that you'll be looking at, pardon for a moment, most of the information that you'll be looking at is going to start in the estimating or contracts and docs tabs over on the left-hand side. So once again, if you're looking at the main interface for ConstructionSuite, you've got the navigation panel on the left-hand side, and one of the top options that you'll have in this, one of the more important options, is going to be the estimating tab. Now, if you navigate into the estimating tab, there's a few key pieces here that you'll be able to work with just looking at the overview for the estimating tab itself. On this main dashboard, you'll be able to get a cost breakdown for all the estimates that we're looking at within the system. These are all going to be pulled from the primary estimates on each of the projects in the projects list. You'll see some of those recent projects over here on the right. You'll actually see more of them if you click on the projects tab. It shows you all of that cost breakdown for all these different estimates here. You'll also see beneath this and to the left a brief overview for all the change orders that you guys have outstanding for all of your live projects. Not only does it show you the change orders themselves, but you'll also be able to see which ones have been accepted, which ones are pending, which ones have been rejected, the cost for those change orders, and then the project they're associated with here as well. To the right of this, you will see all the recent estimates that have been set up within each of these different projects. And these recent estimates are going to be primary for some jobs. Others might be secondary estimates, or in this case, I've got an original estimate versus the revised estimate, which is our negotiated contract with this client. But most of these are going to be based on estimating templates that you can create under the second tab in here called Create New. Now, when you're taking a look at the Create New tab, it's going to show you a couple of key pieces to this. Of course, you've got up at the very top, you've got the estimate wizard. You've got the area to open up a blank estimate, which means no structured categories or subcategories to work with. And then beneath this, you've got all of the different estimating subfolders, like our commercial folders or light commercial folders, residential and remodeling folders. Most of this information is going to be available to you here on the left-hand side, just to give you a little bit of structure. And it's especially useful later if you decide to add in your own custom estimate templates to the ConstructionSuite system, or if you want to go into and modify these. Now, most of you looking at ConstructionSuite are going to have all of these different folders available, but ultimately what I find is most people who are doing remodeling work are typically going to start in with the remodeling master template, which you can find in that remodeling folder. On the residential side, we've got a master and a sample file. The structure for these templates are going to be pretty similar. The residential master and the remodeling master template both have a planning category. They've got most of the costs broken down into demo and foundation and framing and exterior windows and doors and things like that. With the idea being that they're structured from the ground up, or depending on what kind of structure you guys are working with, it might be on the remodeling side, you might be tearing down some of the existing structure and then rebuilding it. But ultimately, it starts there at the beginning of the scheduled section of the job, and it takes you through the closeout and some of those grand overarching things like supervision throughout the whole job and so on. The commercial and light commercial templates are fairly similar, although there's obviously some additional work in here for or additional categories and subcategories there that are a little bit more specific on the commercial side. Maybe there's some engineering involved or something like that. Depending on the type of structures you guys might be working with for commercial or industrial production or construction, you'll find the extra sections in here, and you've got those as a wonderful starting point both for commercial and light commercial, which is kind of your commercial remodeling template, as opposed to the commercial master, which is generally new construction. But we also add to this by providing subcontractor specialty contracts in here, like electrical, landscaping, mechanical, or for those of you who are interested, we also have a CSI 16 division template and a 50 division template in here as well. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with this, CSI stands for, I believe it's the Construction Specifications Institute, and back in 1995 they released a structure for estimating any given project that involved breaking most of the categories of the trades out into 16 main headings, starting with Division 01, general requirements, all the way through 16, which is mechanical, I think. I think 15 is electrical, 16 is mechanical, which would be plumbing and HVAC and things like that. In 2004, they revised this into 50 different divisions, and we don't offer all 50 divisions because some of them are very, very, very specialized, and others are kind of reserved for future use. But of those 50 divisions, it starts out with double lot procurement. 01 is still general requirements or general, just a general heading, and then it goes on from there. Now, if you are ever required to use one of the CSI 16 or 50 division templates, these are perfect for you. These are going to be ideal templates. They give you the structure with all the coding and everything like that. The only thing that's missing are the items that you guys are going to require for your jobs. Now, if you prefer to go with something that's a little bit more trade-based rather than structured as your architect or maybe the banks or something like that might want, or insurance companies might want, you may be better off going with something like a residential or a commercial template in here instead. But the big question comes up, of course, where to start and what do you guys want this to look like? So to begin with, for those of you who are just getting started with ConstructionSuite, I highly recommend that you open up one of these folders that's pretty close to the kind of work that you guys do, and right-click on one of the estimate templates that you'd be interested in taking a look at and select the Edit option. Now, I say edit because if you just double-click on the file or you right-click and open, it's going to try to tell you to save it into a project, and we don't want to do that yet. We're interested right now in just taking a look at the templates, seeing what they offer, and maybe making a few adjustments to them. So first, we're going to right-click and edit this residential master template, and it's going to open up for us like so. And let's take a moment to just look over the options that are available. So in the very beginning, the estimate opens up and it takes you into the project totals page, which is your summary page here in ConstructionSuite, in the estimate rather. Now on this summary page, we've got most of the information broken out into categories and subcategories. If you click on any of the categories or subcategories, it'll actually take you into the items area for each category sheet. So the very first category that I have here is going to be available to you in the name column, and the first one here is planning. The planning category is also the first tab after project totals down here along the bottom, and that's the easy way to figure out which ones are categories and which ones are subcategories. Each of the categories has its own category sheet. Subcategories will only be found within the category sheet. Now those subcategories under planning include design services, permits, lot costs, construction financing, and basically these are the subsections for my planning category. I generally break planning up into these major headings. So if we're talking about doing the floor plan for a new home, for example, that's probably going to fall under design services. When we've got to start to put together the permits, like building permits and zoning permits, of course that's going to be under the permits heading. If we've got to buy a lot for it, of course lot costs and so on. Now I use this because these are terms that are familiar for me, of course. If you guys are interested in changing any of these, you certainly can. Just right-click on any of the categories or subcategories and rename them if it's going to be a little bit easier for you guys to work with at that point moving forward. So you'll be able to change around the existing categories and subcategories just like this. Just right-click on anything that you want to rename and add that in. If you're interested in adding new categories or subcategories, maybe in this case we've got planning first and then it steps into foundation, and site work is the first section here on foundation, but maybe we want to do site work as its own category instead. In this case, there's an add category link right here after the total planning line and right before the foundation category starts, and if you click Add Category, it'll give you the option to name this category whatever you like. And then you can put in new subcategories just by following along with the Add Subcategory links. So, could be something like this, pardon the spelling, and so on. I mean, you could always do whatever you need to in this case, and it should allow you to just go through and build whatever categories and subcategories you guys are most comfortable with. And as you put this information together, you'll notice that we now have a Site Work tab, and if you click into the Site Work tab, you'll actually see some of the categories and subcategories that we've started to put together, although there's not a whole lot of detail in here yet. So I'm going to step back to the project totals page though, and this is going to be your best place to start. Go ahead and put together the categories and subcategories that you guys would typically like to see, or take a look through the existing ones that we have and make sure that everything that you guys would need, at least at a global level, is going to be covered here in one of the templates that you're looking at. So in my case, the residential master takes me through planning, site work, foundation. If you scroll down, you've got framing, exterior windows and doors. You'll see HVAC and plumbing and fireplaces and everything like that. So plenty of different things to work with. And as you get down near the bottom, you'll see that it's focusing a little bit more on finishing out this particular house. So maybe doing some of the exterior work and landscaping and such. We've got exterior finishes, shutters, mailboxes, specialty options, which could be last minute installations for security systems or something like that. And then of course, as you get down near the very bottom, you'll also see that I've got some of those global sections in here too, like supervision. Supervision for me is a project long thing, so I'll put this in the section at the end just so that I can figure out roughly how long the job is going to take, so I can estimate for supervision and project management accordingly. There's also a section here for my punch list allowance. This is going to be the extra time that we take to finish out the job, so I've got my allowances set up for that. And at the very end is going to be a completely separate company overhead and margin category. Now, we'll get to the company overhead and margin later, but for the time being, I'm just going to minimize this category because this is the one category that's going to be the same from job to job, regardless of what kind of construction you guys do. This will always be company overhead and margin. It's always going to cover your cost of doing business, which is your overhead expenses. It's always going to be the profit margin that you guys are looking for. Typically involves contingencies, and then things like sales taxes or any other just insurance, anything like that that you guys might want to put in as a last minute markup. But everything else that we're going to be working on is going to be on the bottom, the body of the subcategories and the categories itself, the body of the project totals page rather. And when you're going through and evaluating what belongs in your estimate templates and what does not, I'd like you guys to consider everything that could possibly go into one of your jobs and include those if you come up with anything. Now this would include, in my case, anything that I could potentially do, like under exterior areas and finishes. I've got decking in here, even though not everybody wants a deck, but I've got it in there so that every time I use it, it's available on each job. It's kind of like making a point to look at it and talk to my clients about it if we're ever talking about doing a house. If they've got any kind of backyard to speak of, and there's a chance that they might want a deck, I want to make sure that we talk about this so that we can include that to the project without having to do any change orders later. It's also going to help make sure that for a general estimate on a residential project, I cover everything that should belong. For exterior areas and finishes, it's not as big of a deal, but if you were to leave out the plumbing category as an example, and you forget to do plumbing rough-in as part of your estimate, if it's in the job itself, if you added it to the job description, but you forgot to estimate part of that cost, you're out a lot of money. So make sure that it's all in the estimate template as you guys are putting this together. And as you're estimating the job, you acknowledge that something needs to be estimated or priced out, or you acknowledge that something's being skipped. Now that said, you can always create one large master template like this one that I have for the residential master, and then trim it down later for very specific jobs. If we're doing a residential master, but later on somebody just wants us to build a guest house for them, that's not going to be as large and probably doesn't involve things like a kitchen or a basement or anything like that. So that might be a smaller estimate template, and I can use my residential master as a starting point, and then just go through and right-click and delete anything that doesn't belong on this guest house. At that point, you can actually come up to the Save menu and save it as a new template and call it a guest house. You could do the same thing on the remodeling side. You could take the remodeling master template, trim it down into a kitchen, trim it down again into a master bathroom, trim it down again into an addition. On the commercial side, you could create one commercial template, which is your doctor's office, another which could be a fast food restaurant or a high-end bar or something like that. You could even do like industrial, like we've got people that do manufacturing plants and frac sand facilities and things like that too. So regardless of how you guys set these up, one large all-encompassing template is a good idea. Trim that down into each of the smaller jobs that you guys could potentially do, and give yourself a good collection of estimating templates for at least the categories and subcategories that you're working with. Now that talks about all of the different categories and subcategories here on the project totals page. If you click into one of these categories, let's go back up to the top of the list, and I'm going to click on my planning category to get into the details and the guts of this category. So when you look into the planning category itself, design services is the first subcategory, and it's got several different items underneath it. These items are going to be basically organized into one of two sets. Most of the items that I have here have been manually entered in. Like I just clicked on add new item and put in whatever this new item is going to be. So in this case, my new item might be under design services, engineering. So if I have to have somebody come out and check the site as an add-on to the survey, just to make sure that it's structurally sound, could be a requirement here, or we might just be talking about doing some other kind of earthquake testing or something, depending on where you guys are going to be living or working in this case. But adding in the new items, looks like I already have that one actually, but that's okay. You can always right-click and delete items if you guys added in the wrong thing, or you can rename them as needed, what have you. But ultimately, there's the add item link, and if you just wanted to add in an item manually, you can click on this, and it will take you into the area where you can do that. Now, if you prefer to add in items from a cost book, you'll have that option as well. For the most part, as you're putting in your items, the add item link is only for manual use. You can right-click and insert from the items database if you would prefer to pull from a series of cost books instead. Now, some of you, as you guys are getting onto the latest versions of ConstructionSuite, you may also notice a search option over here for RS means, or for your own cost data as well. The idea that we're looking for here is to be able to pull from a full collection of prices and items in order to find something that's going to be reasonably close to what you're working with. So if we do right-click and insert from the items database, or if we did a search over on the right-hand side, you'll notice that it's going to open up the items database, and typically it's going to default to one of the RS means cost books. RS means has been a tremendous resource for us. The RS means cost book or RS means as a company has been around for decades, and they've been providing national pricing for all of the United States and Canada. And ultimately what you're looking at is a full catalog of items, which is searchable. Of course, you can just put in here and search for whatever kind of items you want to find. And you'll also notice that there's a multiplier here in the top right corner as you're looking through it as well. And what this multiplier allows you to do is you can click on the drop down here to put in either your zip code for your local area, or you can find your closest city in the Canadian multipliers area. And as you're setting up this multiplier in the top right corner, you'll notice that the pricing information is going to change to become a little bit more accurate for your area. So it's really important, if you're looking at RS means, that you go ahead and select the multiplier that's going to be closest for the area that you guys are working. And that way the pricing information is going to update, and all you have to do is click on the little arrow next to the item that you want to use, and it will insert that item into your estimate template. Now, I like this option because then you've got RS means pricing information that's going to be already built into your estimate template, and all you have to do is go in and put in quantities. The reason that I like this so much is you have one place now where you can go and update all of your prices, and whenever you use the estimates in future jobs, there's going to be an option under the, it's going to be under the estimating menu to refresh all of your prices based on the most up-to-date cost books that you have available. Now, I'm referencing RS means in this case because this is the pricing information that I have available. If you guys actually have your own pricing information, maybe it's from your local suppliers that you guys are able to work with, or you guys just have another one. We've got a lot of clients that have used things like home tech databases and stuff like that as well. If you have some of that kind of pricing information that you guys would like to use as well, there's an easy option under the Tools menu to import cost books from a CSV format. Now this import does pull it in as if it were an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. CSV stands for comma separated value, so typically you'll use Excel to put together this pricing sheet, or have your supplier send you over this pricing sheet and pull it up here to go through it and add in your own pricing information. In this case, when you're ready to pull that into a new cost book, you can select the Import Cost Book CSV, and it'll allow you to create your own cost book. Like I've got a new cost book here, or a sample cost book, and it just populates all the items in there. There is a specific structure for this. If you guys are interested in working with these cost books, we can always send it to you. Just give me a call, or send me over a chat using the questions panel, and I can always send it to you after the webinar itself. The other option is you can start to put together a couple of items in here, and then use the export option first. Go back to Tools, Export Cost Book CSV, and it will create that Excel spreadsheet for you, or that CSV file, and then you can see where all your material costs are, and the categories and subcategories and the structure and everything like that. So it's really nice though, because it's a lot faster to go through the Excel spreadsheet to update prices or update expirations for your items than it is to come into and open up each individual item and then maybe right click and edit the items to change some of these things. Now I've talked about this because RS Means provides a lot of national average pricing. RS Means does on occasion provide assemblies as well, and you can build your own assemblies in your own cost book, but the RS Means assemblies are pre-packaged collections of items for doing a certain thing. So for example, if you were building a new house and you've got a lot of interior walls that you guys are going to be constructing, it might be easier to go over to the Assemblies tab in the Residential Cost Book, take a look at interiors, look for interior partitions, drywall and thin coat, and here, for whichever one you guys are going to be using, you'll see a collection of materials and labor for installation for all the different things that are going to be required for wall systems, interior walls. This, again, it's a great starting point for you guys. It doesn't involve framing, I don't think, in this case, but it takes care of most of the hanging of drywall and putting in baseboards and painting and everything like that. So if you guys know what the length is, or the total square foot of interior walls are that you guys are going to be working with, you could insert the total quote here, and it'll just ask you guys what the quantity is, and it'll put together a subcategory for you and populate the quantity for each of the items required for this. It'll even keep your materials and labor separated so that if you run a labor report later, it'll show you how much you've projected for hanging drywall as opposed to how much got done. Now, drywall might be a bad example in this case because most of you guys will probably have your own prices that you're going to be working with for this. One place that I found a lot of my customers really enjoy the value of having these RS Means cost books comes from the fact that most people, most general contractors at least, hire subcontractors to do a lot of things like electrical work or mechanical work or something like that. Now in this case, RS Means works as a solid double check tool for you guys at any given point. So if you've got an electrician coming in and they're going to be wiring your whole house or something like that, you can always take a look through the RS Means cost book and find some of the wiring services that are available and then figure out how much that's going to cost as a broad overview for what you guys are going to be working with. Now again, I wouldn't use this as an absolute or strict guideline for how much the electrician is going to be charging you, but it does do an excellent job of showing you a rough ballpark for what that number should be. So if your electrician provides a number that's twice this, maybe he's estimating a different set of plans than you guys are looking at, perhaps, or something like that. So excellent tool for double checking their pricing information. And if you don't know how much something is going to cost ahead of time, it's also a good tool for coming up with that ballpark figure, just so that you can put together a quick proposal for your clients. So keep everything moving forward and use this kind of stuff if you don't have pricing information already for them. Now, as I mentioned, inserting the information, even in this case, is going to be pretty straightforward. You just go to the area that you'd like to insert the information in, and then select what you're going to be inserting. In my case, let's do a 200 amp service, and then we'll just insert it into the estimate. It will create the subcategory, put in all the items, put in the requirements for those items, and you're all set. You can see it building out, and it even links into those items after the fact as well. So at any time you could just click on the item and it'll take you right back into the cost book in that area. So there it is. Each of the items has come in with the units and everything like that as well, and you'll find most of the detail and everything like that in here. Again, since they're linked into your cost books, if you guys are using the cost book items, you can always update the price in the cost book and then later refresh all your pricing here, and these numbers would be updated for what is currently available today. Now, it's not going to do that automatically for all of your estimates. God knows we wouldn't want to change the pricing information available in an estimate that's been underway for 6 months. So I don't recommend using it for those jobs, but for all of your new estimates that you're putting together, this is extremely handy, really time-saving feature here. Just going into update your cost book, and then you can refresh the pricing in any relevant estimate that needs a quick price adjustment. It's also already built in, so you don't have to do all that extra work. And you'll notice that most of the items, along with the pricing information and the units, they also come in with notes, which for RS means describes how they came to the prices that they use. Most cases it's going to be labor related or equipment related, but it does a decent job of showing you what their thought process is and where these numbers are coming from. They're not just pulled out of thin air. They actually have a relevant basis in this case. So you'll be able to do that. And the important thing for me in this case is if we're looking at putting together an estimating template, the items have to be relevant. You have to get strong pricing information in here so that all you need to do is go in and put in a couple of quantities or dimensions or something like that. Now, in addition to the categories, subcategories, and items, there's more information that you can set up ahead of time in your estimate templates as well. Now, in the estimate itself, you're going to have some additional columns that you'll be working with on a regular basis, most notably the notes, the name, the quantity, the cost, and the units. Maybe not quantity initially. Those are probably going to start out at 0, but you've got these things to work with, and the template is all about setting up most of this information ahead of time. But there's more fields in here that I would want you guys to go ahead and configure ahead of time, just so that you don't have to re-enter this information every time as you estimate. Notes is a big one for me because the categories, subcategories, and sometimes the items are going to be standard from job to job if there's a price associated with it. For example, HVAC is almost always going to be quote provided per subcontractor. All of the details and everything like that are going to be involved. And so under my HVAC system, I might put in or preload some of the notes to describe to my client where this number is coming from and what's going to be involved in this. You'll be able to do similar things with plumbing and exterior windows and doors and framing and foundation and everything like that. Ultimately, I recommend using the general notes as a container for your specifications for these jobs and put in as much information into the general notes as you can, as long as it's boilerplate information. Obviously, don't put in specific parts that were selected on one job, but you could put in just a general description for what's included in HVAC, especially if you've got, your average home buyer and they don't know that much about it. This is a good place to kind of describe it for them. So general notes tends to work well for that. Bid notes tends to focus a little bit more on information that you're receiving from the subcontractor, maybe cataloging a couple of different bids for different subs that you guys have set up. Field notes would be anything that's going to be relevant for your personnel that's going to be out on the job site putting everything together. So who to look for, who to call in case of emergency or anything like that. Now you also notice there's going to be an attachments section here as well. For me, the attachments is an excellent place to go in and put in any of the files or pictures or anything like that that you guys need to keep track of. Just keep in mind that the attachments portion of the estimate is for internal use only. So if you are receiving several bids, you can come in here and browse to attach the bids directly into this section of the estimate, and then you can reference them later. But there's not going to be a report or a tool that allows you to pull these bids into a single report to send off to your client. It's not how it works. It just allows you guys to link them in here so you can go back and reference. And from here, you'll also notice that there's going to be some schedule information, but that comes later. We'll talk about that on Thursday. So notes, great place to be very detailed for the work that you guys are going to do. The name column, of course, is just light item names, subcategory names, things like that. The type column is going to be where you can set up, initially for the estimate template, estimated costs, allowances, and options. Now the plan here is allowances, of course, are going to be your customer's pocket money for going and buying something. You might give them an allowance to go buy kitchen appliances, or you might give them an allowance to go purchase flooring supplies or carpets or something like that. Ultimately, that's your discretion on how the allowances are set up, but it's you setting aside a certain budget for the estimate that the client is going to go pick out something at a later date. Options, on the other hand, are things that are not going to factor into the contract value unless the client selects to use that. The deck would be a prime example that we were talking about earlier. I have, as an option with any house that we build, a deck package included, but it's an optional addition to that contract. If the customer doesn't want a deck, or they want somebody else to put together the deck or something like that, that's fine. They can always do that through somebody else at a later date. You know, no harm, no foul. It's not part of building the house. It's not a requirement here, so we might throw it in there as an option. The estimated costs, on the other hand, these are our hard numbers. This is what we know it's going to cost in order to do the job, and these are, generally speaking, these are not flexible or negotiable numbers. This is just how much it costs, and we're going to put it in here, and we're going to move on. Now, if you do select one of these other options, you get a visual indicator that there's something going on. If you select allowances, there's a blue hashing that'll show up here. If you select option, there's a gray hashing that'll show up. And then later, once this estimate becomes part of a live job, you can also select change orders, which will create a yellow hashing across this. Now, we also talked briefly about this yesterday, but there's going to be a detailed method. Let's switch that back to estimate. There's a detailed versus lump sum option here. Your lump sum is typically going to be a subcontractor's bid or a high dollar item like a lot cost. Detailed would be you having the ability to go in and break out or itemize what's going to be available in here. Next up, of course, is going to be your classification. You're going to have 5 of these to work with: material, labor, sub, equipment, other. Everything falls under one of those 5 classifications. If there's ever a question as to whether or not it does really belong, you can always put in NA as well. Our goal here with this, though, is breaking everything up in such a way that you can see all of the material costs on a job, the labor costs, the sub costs, and so on. That's what showed up on the classification breakdown. It also shows up over on the estimate summary tab. You've got this little panel just above the RS means cost data that shows you a breakdown of costs by classification. If you ever expand this out, it'll show you how much you've estimated so far for material costs, for labor costs, for installation, equipment costs, and so on. Again, this becomes much more relevant later when you're putting together an estimate for a live project. But again, your goal in this case is to go ahead and predefine as much of this as possible. So under HVA system, I'm just looking at all of the materials that we might have to go buy, not necessarily the installation. So these are all going to be material costs. In my case, we would actually need somebody to come and install this, so maybe we should put in HVAC installation as an additional subcategory, which I am only ever going to put in a lump sum value for because we're not doing the install. And then the subcontractor, since I only ever use subcontractors for the installation for HVAC, I'm just going to let them put it in like so. This is going to include all the ductwork and the ventilation and everything like that. I don't want to do any of this work. I don't want to try to estimate it or anything like that, so I just get whatever the bid is and go from there. So that's it. There is a question here about the classifications. Somebody was asking if you can add a classification, and in this case, the classifications are fixed options. You only have the 5.5, I guess, to pick from. It's always going to be material, labor, sub-equipment, other. And the only other option, of course, here is NA, which doesn't have anything else that applies to it. Now, the reason that it's a static 5 is we also use all these classifications are available through several of the reports. Like under project management, there's a classification report that filters down to these specific classifications. But on the estimating side, we also give you an area under the estimating tab to set a classification markup. Now, your classification markup is going to be covering the cost of waste on materials. You might put in an additional 15% markup on all materials to cover the cost of anything that gets trimmed off or wasted or stolen or anything like that. You can build in that extra factor. I've got a lot of clients that'll go through and put together a labor markup as well to cover the cost of labor burden. Each employee is going to have insurance, and they're going to get vacation time, and they're going to have uniforms and things like that you'll have to pay for. Factor it all in as part of a labor burden, and you can apply that labor burden here so that it goes over to QuickBooks or your accounting system with that number built into the cost. Again, makes life a little bit easier for you here. Under subcontractor markup, you could do the same thing. If you want to add a fee for that, it's your business, but go ahead and put these together as part of your estimate template as well, and that way you don't have to remember your estimate, your classification markups later. It's all built in again and ready for you guys to use as soon as you open up the estimate. So this is another important one. You'll also know on the estimating tab, you'll notice that there's some additional sections in here as well, like setting sales tax. You can open up the items database from here or refresh the prices from the items database if you need to. Most of this information is going to be built in on this page or on this tab because these are all directly related to coming up with your estimate prices. Now, along the lines of markup, the line item markups themselves, if you decide to apply them, will show up in a column in the estimate called line item markup. And there's a dollar markup which gives you the resulting value for that. Right now that column isn't visible. So if you go to the View menu, take a look for a button here called Show Hide Columns, and you can open up some additional columns to work with. Now in my case, I'm just going to go through and open up everything. I'm turning on all the columns because there's some of these that I'd also like to go ahead and bring to your attention. Some of them are new. Some of them you guys might want to work with as well. So let's just step through these relatively quickly. So we've talked about the notes column. That one's pretty straightforward. You click into the notes, you type in a description of the work, and you move on. The name is going to be your category, subcategories, or items. So all of that's going to show up in the name column, and you can right-click and rename anytime. The description is a shorter description than the notes, and this will show up on some of the reports and can carry over to QuickBooks at a later date. So if you want really simple names, and then use the description to add a little bit more detail and the notes to add a lot more detail, that's your perfect medium. Don't try to get too wordy in the description though, because as you can see here, there's only a limited amount of space available for you guys to see, although you can always expand out your columns as needed as well. Just try to keep it short and simple if you can. So type, method, and classification are things that we've talked about. The status column though, this is going to be primarily used for either change order status or bid status. So right now, since we're working on an estimating template, your status column is going to represent just bid status, and everything is going to be either estimated, in bidding, or a firm contract for something. So if you select estimated, when you run a status report, it's going to pull out everything that you guys have as an estimated cost. If it's got a subcontractor classification and it's a bid status, then that means that you've sent it out for bid, but you don't have a contract with anybody yet. As soon as you get that contract, flip to firm, and then the reporting tools available in ConstructionSuite would be able to recognize and pull out all that information as under contract. Now when you do get the contract for people, let's skip across here. When you do get the contract for people that you guys are working with, typically you'll add them into the resource column here. And if you click into the resource column, it's going to pull from your full company contacts list in ConstructionSuite to assign who's doing the work or where you're buying the materials. Now again, this is something that's going to become much more appropriate on a job-by-job basis. You use this in the estimate, not necessarily ahead of time. But if you do have a subcontractor or a supplier that you use every time for a specific section, go ahead and pre-populate them. Just click into the field here, select the person from the contacts list, in this case, and they'll be in there and ready to go. Now as soon as you assign a resource, it will also grab that resource's contact group and put it in here. And that way this information is going to be available to you as well. This is not a field that you can populate on your own. It's all depending on the resource that you've set. Dimensions and quantities are going to be tied together in most cases. The dimension would be a measurement that you guys are doing, so you might go in there and measure the dimensions of the master bedroom. And those dimensions could apply for, they could apply as you guys are setting up things like carpeting for the bedroom or hardwood floors in there. The flooring dimensions would determine the flooring for the job itself. If you guys do the measurements for the walls, total square footage of interior walls, that goes back into the installation for the assembly that we were talking about earlier. You could plug that in as part of that. But ultimately, the dimension determines what the quantity is for most of these items. Quantities, costs, and units we've talked about, but you can always switch these things out by clicking into and entering in values. On the quantity side, it's important to note that a 0 represents nothing on that particular line. A blank quantity is considered to be a 1 as you're going through there. So if everything in your estimate template is blank, that means that you put in a 1 for all the quantities, or effectively there's a 1 for each quantity, so keep that in mind. Costs are pretty straightforward. You put in your unit cost for everything that you're working with and you'll be good to go. Units as well, if you click into this, it's a big list. You can go through and search for the type of unit that you're looking for. Switch this out as needed. You'll also be able to get from this, quantity times cost gives you an estimated value. The estimated value is just pure if there was no tax and there was no markups and there was nothing else associated with this. It's just quantity times cost gives you that extended value and it's under estimate. After that, you can add in the tax rates. And for US users, that's going to be material, service, tax included or not taxed. Set this up in your template, please, because the value for the tax that you put in later can apply automatically as long as the tax type is set ahead of time. Otherwise, you're going to have to go in on every single line item and set the sales tax type, and that's just a pain. So set that up ahead of time. When you do set it up ahead of time and you go up to the estimating tab and put in the values for your tax types, then you'll see that resulting dollar amount showing up here. So it takes care of itself as long as you set it up. So I mentioned in the United States, we've got material, service, and tax included. If you're just about anywhere else, you'll have things like Canadians will have GST, PST, HST. They're similar, I think, for Australia and stuff like that. So your country that you put in when you're setting up the company information will determine which tax types you see here. Tax types and sales tax are tied together, just like line item markup and the dollar markup. I don't know what happened to my dollar markup column. I'm sure it's probably just off to the right. But ultimately, the line item markup will typically represent the classification markup percentage, or if you click into the cell, it will allow you to put in your own markup percentage or dollar amount for anything that you guys are going to be working with. So if you have that flexible percentage that you want to include, that's the perfect place to do it. Now, the other thing about this too, we've got an estimated cost, which is your extended value. Quantity times cost gives you estimate. Estimate plus sales tax gives you total cost. And in this case, you can also highlight one of these columns if you want to move them, and then left click and hold it to drag it to a new location. So I'll move my total cost over because estimate plus sales tax gives me total cost. Total cost plus line item markup gives me total price. This is how much you should expect to pay. This is how much you're charging your client for something. So total cost is how much you pay out of pocket. Total price is how much your client pays for these particular line items. And this total price is going to roll down to the bottom of the estimate itself. If you come back to project totals, you'll see all of this additional information totaling up down here. So there's the total price for the estimate itself. And after the total price, you will be applying the company overhead and margin as an add-on to this. The total price should reflect the cost of doing business if you were a nonprofit. Hopefully none of you guys are nonprofits, or if you are nonprofits, good for you. The next section you guys can ignore. But the section after this is going to be your company overhead and margin section, and this is where you guys put in how much money you want to make. So in an ideal world, you guys could probably just put in millions of dollars in this little section in here, but you can't make that much on every job, unfortunately. So instead, what you'll do is, in your estimate template, come into the company overhead and margin section, plug in the percentage that you guys apply for your company overhead margin, and save this as part of the template as well. This should always be part of the template, predefined. Don't have to come back and revisit this later. Just plug it in now and we're good. The calculation options, however, are important. I kind of briefly talked about this yesterday, but I want to go ahead and touch on it again today because as you're setting up your estimate template, you want to make sure that you get the right percentage in here and you choose the right calculation option for that percentage as well. Now I say this because there's two primary options for your calculations in here. You can either work with a percent margin or a percent of costs. Generally speaking, if you do cost plus contracts, you're going to be working with percent of costs. If the contract value is $100,000 or you spend $100,000 getting the job done, and you add a percentage markup on top of that, let's say 15%, then you're charging your client $115,000. If it's a 25% markup that you guys apply on a $100,000 job, your grand total at the end is going to be $125,000 because $100,000 plus 25% is $125,000. So that's your percent of costs, and in that situation you would put in a 25% here and it will add 25% on top of the cost of doing the job, and that's the contract value, and that's what you charge your clients. Easy enough. Now the other option is going to be a percent markup, a percent margin rather. And your percent margin is the number that your accountant will be talking about when they're talking about the profitability of your jobs. Ultimately, the percent margin is going to be the percentage of the contract value that was set aside to cover your company's overhead or your profit margin or whatever it is. Now, using the same end number as earlier, if you had a $125,000 contract, and let's go ahead and put that in. Let me step back here and find the subcategory that has a price, and we'll switch that out for something else. Actually, while I'm looking through this, it took a little while for me to scroll. If you guys wanted to find it a little bit more easily, you can also come to the View menu and hide everything that did not get used. If you hide everything that's unused, anything that has a $0 amount for it goes away. It just gets brushed under the rug and you don't have to see it anymore. So hiding the unused sections makes it really easy to find this 200 amp electrical service that we were talking about earlier. In this case, I'm going to right click and delete it and just get it out of the way so that we can move on. So that's done, but now I need to unhide those. So now I'm going to show unused sections. Show unused sections, and now everything is back. So next up, I'm just going to put in one large lump sum value so that we can put together a solid example here for your company overhead margin. So one at $100,000. Again, quick reminder, quantity is still blank, which represents a 1. $100,000 unit cost gives us a $100,000 contract. And now if we go back to the company overhead margin, you can see that the 25% adds 25% on top of that, $25,000, just like I said. Easy enough. Percent margin, on the other hand, is going to look at this number and it's going to say, I want to set aside as my percentage of the project total as my overhead. So in this situation, if we were just to switch this out, you could get the same result by putting in a 20% margin instead of a 25% margin. There you go. Sorry, a 20% margin instead of a 25% cost. And you'll end up with a $125,000 contract. So we got the same number, but we use two different calculation methods and two different percentages. And the reason that this works is $100,000 plus 25% gives you $125,000. That's percent of costs. But $125,000, if you take 20% away from that, you're taking $25,000 and you're left with the other 80%, which is $100,000, and that's your contract value. 25% is, or $25,000 is your 20% margin. So same dollar amount, two different calculations. The margin percentage is going to look like it should be less, but it's always going to be a greater dollar amount. So 20% of costs is always less than 20% margin. 25% of costs equals 20% margin. And depending on what kind of companies you guys work with, this could be a pretty big, important determining factor. One of the partner companies that we've worked with here recently, a partner organization, is Remodelers Advantage. And for home remodelers, they recommend using, I think it's a 67% markup, which would be percent of costs. And that's the equivalent of a 40% margin for remodeling jobs. So in this case, if I were to add this in as a 40% margin, it's going to bring my grand total up to 167 or 166.666, so on. So if we try that, there it is. Again, same concept as if we had used a 67% of costs. Percent of costs also should give us the there you go, 167, or close enough to it. So that's the kind of relationship that you're looking at here between the numbers. So make sure that you get the right one, and if you guys are in doubt, use margin. You'll make more money that way. Now, this is all about setting up the estimate templates. We've just spent a good long time talking about this, but the important things to consider as you guys are setting up your estimate templates are going back to the project totals page. You want to make sure that your categories, subcategories, and items are set up the way you need them to be. You need to make sure that your classifications are all configured on those estimates. Make sure that you guys get these set up. Make sure that you get your notes in place over here on the left-hand side in those templates. And make sure that if you are using items from cost books or something like that, that you get your item costs into place and the units for those item costs. So, quick pause for a question here. How would you recommend estimating a project with multiple phases? And can you create and track multiple estimates for a single job? That is an amazing question. I'm so glad you asked, because there's a couple of columns that will come into play as you estimate your jobs that might not come into play as much for your estimating templates. for those jobs. And two of those columns that I want to open up right now are going to be your room column and your phase column. So I'm going to step into one of these subcategories now, and let's change the columns that are going to be available. I'm going to go with a simple view for now. If you guys are interested, by the way, there are some predefined views down here in the bottom right-hand corner of your estimate. The one on the far left is going to be the standard view, which gives you this. The one on the far right is the everything. It opens up all columns. Now I'm going for the standard view because if you go back up to the view menu and show hide columns, you'll also find a phase and a room column within this. And the phase and room column are going to be drop-down menus that you can populate yourself. So as you guys are going through working on a particular project, if you've got multiple phases, you can click in the drop-down for your phase, edit the phases here, and then you can go through and build all the phases that you guys would want to keep track of within this single estimate. You can do the same thing for rooms. And phases I see very commonly used on commercial projects. Doesn't really matter the size too much, but phases will come into play a lot for those. Rooms might come into play a little bit more if you guys are doing residential remodeling projects. But I've also got some clients that'll they build hotels, so or build out existing hotels. So they'll go in there and they'll gut a lot of the existing rooms. That's all part of the demolition phase. And then as they start rebuilding the contents for these rooms, they'll typically go floor by floor. So those become phases as well. It could be the first floor, second floor, third floor. And then on each of those floors, they'll number each of the rooms. Typically they'll go from A through however many rooms they have on the floor, just so that they can do, this is floor 2, room AA, or something like that. So you'll see that information coming together. Now this becomes really important because not only does it allow you to create one master estimate for a job, one large estimate that involves several individual components, like several phases or several rooms that are all coming together, it keeps it together in one place, allows this to feed into QuickBooks in one section, but more importantly, it also allows you to break up your estimate and report off of individual little subsections that are a little easier to manipulate. So this is when you'll start to get into some of the reports that are going to be available and why these things are so important as well. The estimate itself has a lot of great overarching structure that you guys can work with. You can break that overarching structure into smaller pieces using the rooms and phase columns. You can also do this by separating out the different classifications or using different units or what have you. When you need to start pulling that information out into meaningful ways, it's time to go up and take a look at the Reports tab in the estimate. And on the Reports tab, we've broken up most of the reports into 4 major headings plus the Proposal Wizard. The Proposal Wizard is extremely important, and we'll touch on that here in just a couple of minutes. But before we get into that, I want to go through and show you guys the list of reports as they break up into different sections. So it starts off with the Project Management reports. And under Project Management, you'll have a lot of the reports for not only making sure that the job is progressing in a solid way, but a lot of the reports that also help you guys make sure that what you've done so far is deliberate and part of the actual contract. So you've got things in here like room and phase reports so that you can break up this information organized by room or organized by phase. You'll be able to pull from this something like a labor report, so you could see how many man hours were estimated for this particular job and hand this off to your project management team or your site supers so that they can see how much you guys have estimated and figure out if you guys are on target. You'll also see other things in here as well, like over budget reports, remaining balance reports. Classification report is an extremely good one for pulling out all the materials for the job and just giving a brief overview for that for any of your clients. And all of this information is going to be available under the project management dropdown. Most of these reports are designed for internal use. When you start wanting to pull this information from your estimates and send it out to subcontractors or vendors or suppliers, this is when you'll step into the vendor reports section. So under vendor reports, it's a little bit more of a limited list because there's not as much to share with people outside of the company, at least not yet. So from the vendor reports drop-down menu, you'll have options like material lists and purchase orders and subcontractor contracts. When you're trying to figure out who's going to be bidding on the job, you can also send out an RFQ, which is a bid request package. You'll have those reports that you can run here. Later on, as the job is live, you'll also have change order requests as well. On the customer side, aside from the proposal, which is going to get generated first, You'll also have options to create things like change order contracts, which would either be fixed fee contracts or cost plus, depending on how you guys organize your change orders. You're going to have summary reports for those change orders, and then you'll be able to generate an allowance report for your client so that they can see what items they have to go out and purchase for themselves and how much of a budget they get for each of those items. There'll also be an options report which you can include as part of that sales package so that the client could be able to go in there and see that in the price of the job itself, you guys have not included the cost of a deck. And if they do include the deck, there's an option for a better deck. There's also an option for a gas line that could hook up to a gas grill on that deck. So, these are a couple of the different options that might be in there. You could do an option for an allowance package, for upgrades, for different things like that. So those would all be available when you generate the options report for the client. And of course, as you're going through this, once the job becomes live, odds are good that you guys are going to be stepping into the financial report at this time so that you guys can do a lot of job costing. Now, with the QuickBooks integration that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail tomorrow, you'll have the ability to send everything over to QuickBooks at the click of a button. All the estimates, invoices, change orders, credit memos, even purchase orders based on the resources that you've assigned here in the estimate. And as you send that information over, it preloads everything that your bookkeepers are going to need in QuickBooks in order to put together things like bills and write checks and put together paychecks and things like that. As those other transactions get built, that information then gets imported back into ConstructionSuite as your actual costs so that you could do an estimate versus actuals report. You could also do profitability reports to see how much has been paid versus how much you've made. All of this information also fills back into a WIP report that you can see tomorrow. But that WIP report just gives you a good idea of your gross profitability on each of your jobs and shows you where you've got to make up ground. And it does something similar to what a lot of these financial reports do. So you've got all these different reports, and they break information up into meaningful ways, and they tend to be a lot more useful than just trying to print out the entire estimate. For starters, they give it to you in just a couple of pages, whereas the estimate right now is how many sheets long? 20, 25, something like that. I would much rather have 2 pages of useful information than 25 sheets that I have to flip through with a highlighter and figure out something good. So reports are extremely useful, and they're also pretty customizable as well, to varying degrees. Some of the reports are very simple and straightforward. If you just needed to pull out all the notes that you put together, List Notes report is perfect. It tells you the item, it gives you the notes for the item. It tells you the next item and the notes for that item. Very simple report, very useful and powerful, but very simple. It serves a very specific purpose. Some of the other reports are multi-purpose, like the classification report could organize all of your costs by classification, or it could just pull out everything that fits the material classification, or you could pull out everything for a specific resource and show the classifications or something like that. And basically, it all revolves around that classification section. So List Notes is not so detailed. Classification provides a very detailed table of information, and then you've got some that are somewhere in between, like the item units report or the over budget report. So again, they serve very specific purposes, and you can always run the report, and if you don't like the contents, you don't have to save it or anything like that. But most of these reports are going to be run based on live estimates for jobs. So at this point, I'm going to switch away from the estimating template, and I'm going to open up an estimate that's part of a live project. So let's go take a look at the Stokes Reno. That one doesn't have one. Simpson Tenant Improvement, I think we created one yesterday. Yeah, it's perfect. Let's go with this. All right, so on this estimate, we've already got most of the pricing information put together, and if memory serves, even though this is labeled as a tenant improvement project, I'm pretty sure that this one followed the residential estimating template, or the residential sample at least. So you'll see a lot of the pricing information in the same category, subcategory structure as we were just looking at for that residential master. This, by the way, is part of the beauty of these templates. We have given you structured templates with recommendations on the type of job to use. If you guys want to take this recommendation or take this template and use it on a different type of job, you are free to do so. Again, talking about this earlier, you can also change it around a little bit and save it as a completely different style of template if you want, or build your own, in which case you'll probably start with a blank. But again, the goal here is to create a good solid structure like this one. Planning is my first category, foundation is next, then framing. We've got pricing information for each of these. You can see the total price, which again is going to be the price for the client on this one. My price would be the total cost. That's the number that I'm going to be paying. Total price is what the client is going to pay. And at the end of the estimate, you'll even see that we've got the company overhead margin with a value down here as well. There it is. So next up, it comes to reporting on this. I've got all the information. We've put together all the different categories and subcategories and items. We've even got the company overhead margin. If you ever want to double check some of this information, you can always click into each of these areas and just verify the information that's in here. Most of it is going to be pretty straightforward. Keep in mind too that if there's a lot of information to sift through and a good portion of it didn't get used, you can always go back up to the view menu and hide everything that didn't get used to keep it short and sweet. Back to the front page we go. So here's all the details that belong in the estimate or belong in the proposal. And at this point, after you put together an estimate, your first step will typically be generating the proposal. So at this point, I'm going to take you through the proposal wizard relatively quickly and just kind of explain what some of these different options do. And I do that with the proposal wizard more than any of the other reports because the other reports are a little bit more straightforward. They'll have the different options that you guys might want to check to include a table that have, you know, the description column in the table, or the unit cost in the table, or something like that. With the proposal, you've got 12 different templates, several different layouts, a ton of different options. So it's more important to get right because this is the presentation for your company, but it's also more important to cover in this case because there's a lot going on. Now, to begin with, I mentioned earlier that everything in here is split into one of two sections. You've got your residential template set and you've got your commercial template set. Ultimately, this just gives you 12 total templates that you can work off of, half of which you'll find under the left tab, half of which you'll find under the right tab, but you can always kind of mix and match as you need to. So as you go through and you select the different template types that you're going to be working with, the next screen takes you into and confirms the details for the jobs themselves. Over here, you've got the project information. This is the job that you've set up for it, so just make sure that the address information is correct. Left-hand side is going to be the primary customer for this. There could be more than one person that you guys need to send it to, but the automated systems allow you to create just one proposal for one primary contact, which could be switched out later. Now, some of the other options in here, of course, there's one to automatically insert your letterhead. We'll talk about that one in a moment. There's some additional documents in here as well. So if you wanted to generate the proposal and a cover sheet for your fax, you can do that. If nobody uses faxes anymore, then you don't have to. There's transmittal documents in here. There's memos, envelopes, everything like that. The next page is your layout options. On this page, you've got one of 6 different layouts that you can choose. Again, I chose the residential set, and you'll notice that some of my residential templates have labels associated with them as well. Like this one is a 3-piece bathroom. This one, I've got a standard kitchen. Down here, we've just got custom options, but if you select one of these, you can always highlight the text in here and change it out to whatever you want. This will be saved as soon as you go through and finish generating a proposal, but keep an eye on the proposal wizard itself, because if you ever want to change out any of these proposals, you can also just click the Edit Template link right here to make changes to the proposal. This is very, very important as well, that you always come here to edit your templates instead of trying to just drop a new template in elsewhere. Your templates here are going to open up the one that ConstructionSuite is going to look to every time if you use this particular template. From now on, if you ever check this box to create this 3-piece bathroom, it will only ever use the template that's linked here and nothing else. You can't point it to a different template. You can't do anything like that. So always make sure that you edit this template if you want to change what the 3-piece bathroom proposal is going to look like. Always this one. And of course, you've got 6 different templates to choose from, so you've got plenty of flexibility to go in here and put together anything that you want. So set those up, click Next, and from the project, every project that you create in ConstructionSuite is going to have some additional fields. There will be things like a scope of work and special conditions associated with the project. If you put it together in the project, you'll see that information showing up here. If you didn't, because you skipped that step, like I did, then you'll have to type it in at this point or just uncheck the box so that it doesn't include the scope of work or special conditions. Now, I want you guys to see where the scope and the special conditions comes in, so let's go ahead and put in something. This is the scope of work. This is the special conditions section. So again, these just give you the ability to go in and put in some of the information. Again, if you're looking for recommendations here, the scope should be a very basic outline for what you're doing on the job. In this case, if it's a new home, the scope might be we're creating a new home for the Simpsons. They're modeling this after our Franklin floor plan with a few adjustments. And under special conditions, this could be anything that you guys have specifically outlined for the job, things that maybe you're not going to do, or things that you want to make sure that you outline for the customer so that there's no question when the job is done that you guys did not at any point have plans to do X, Y, Z. So for the special conditions, I usually recommend this be the area that you put in exclusions. If the customer doesn't want you guys to install a driveway, put in under special conditions, no driveways. Things like that. Make sure that you're very explicit here. On the next page, we've got base price information for the proposal itself. Again, same as before, it's going to remember these settings from job to job. So if this is a new home, the new home is going to include planning, demo, construction, cleanup, all the bits and pieces. You can always click in here as well and change this out if you need to. Below this, you've got a couple of additional sections that will show up in the proposal. Like if you want to have an area at the top of the proposal that outlines all of the allowances for your client, check the box here for standard allowances. If you want to include an options section as well, there's a checkbox for that. In the estimate, you've got a company overhead margin section. If you want the markups, like all of the extra costs to be factored into your allowances, you can check this box too. I personally prefer not to do that because I want the standard allowances to show the client exactly how much they can spend on that and not a penny more. I don't want them thinking that they can spend my markup on their allowance because that's how we make money. Now you'll also have the option down here for base price includes lot costs. This is just going to be basically a grand total area where it shows the total base price for the job. On the next page, these are not demolitions. These are the dimensions for the job. We were talking about these earlier, so these could be measurements from the floor plan or anything like that. Anything that you need to include as talking points, you can always check the boxes here and include those as well. And on the next page, this is really where you get into the meat of the proposal itself. And there are plenty of options here for you guys to work with, so I know you can find your perfect sweet spot for how to display this estimate information in your proposal. It's just a matter of looking at the combination of options that's available here. Now to begin with, if you don't want to give your client any kind of description of the body of the estimate itself, you put together the estimate and all they need to see is a grand total, just ignore this whole section. Uncheck the box, you don't need the project totals report, you can skip it and move on. If you do want to show them some degree of a breakdown, then you can start diving into the different options. So if you want them to see any of the pricing information at all, make sure that you come in here and include something in the total cost. It could be the estimated cost that we were looking at earlier, plus sales tax and line item markup, which means that you're showing them the total price. Include all three of these, they get the total price for the job, which is what they're paying anyway, so you might as well just leave them all checked. There's also going to be the question of the company overhead margin. Now on this estimate, it's a $450,000 home, of which $90,000 is my the company overhead margin. I don't want to have the discussion with the customer on why I think it's fair to charge $90,000. It is. We're putting that in, and if you choose to include the company overhead margin, which you should definitely do, I would recommend prorating it into each of the categories so that it just folds that cost into everything else that you guys are doing. This way you don't have to have the conversation on whether or not that's what it costs to build a house. That is what it costs to build a house, so let's just put it in there and move on. Now, for those of you who are working on open book or cost plus contracts, including it as a separate item is probably going to be a little bit more fair. Because this way they'll see exactly what you guys are charging. But again, depending on the kind of jobs that you do, I'm going to prorate. Now there's an option over here on the right to prorate into allowances. We kind of already talked about that. I don't like that option, but you can always use it if you want to. It's right here. You can also do things like including the notes. Now I talked about earlier in the template, going ahead and putting the specifications in here, and this is why. In this case, if you were to run a proposal and include the notes, checking the option to include the general notes allows you to put together a spec sheet with the proposal in the middle of the proposal itself. So again, good option for me there. I like this because now you're doing two things with only the work of one. So extra benefits here as well. Over on the left-hand side, under the total cost options, you've also got the options to hide subtotals or line item costs. Ultimately, if I choose to include categories and subcategories, which is the default for the proposal, then I'm going to get something that looks about like this. It'll show planning as a category, and then it'll show subcategories underneath it: design services, permits, lot costs, and construction financing. Right now, the options that I have selected will show design services $5,000, permits $3,500 plus the company overhead margin. So it's probably going to be design services at $6,500 or something like that. Permits at about $5,000 or what have you. But at the end of this section, this category, it's going to show total planning for $97,000. Now, if you wanted to hide this total planning $97,000, check this box. I was about to put my hand up to cover the screen, but checking this box removes this line from the project totals portion of the proposal. If you don't want to show these numbers, but you do want to show this number, then you could always leave the subtotal, but hide the line item costs, these costs. So each line will have a hidden cost, but the category as a whole will still show a subtotal. So if you don't want to show anything in the pricing information, then you could just check them both. Leaves this blank until you get down to the grand total for the job. So again, pick your sweet spot. This is mine, and it remembers these settings the next time you come through. There's also some additional options. We had the question earlier about rooms and phases. If you want to break that out as part of the proposal, you got options for that. They're right here. If you guys wanted to include some additional information here as well, take a look through, see what options are available, and then just click Finish when you find that sweet spot, and then that'll give you your proposal. Now, the other thing that I would mention about the proposals, and all the other reports, by the way, these will all generate in a system called OnPoint. OnPoint is our word processing software, and what you'll find with OnPoint is that it's going to be very, very similar to working with Microsoft Word. It should be very easy for you guys to get into and work with. You can always go through and change this information after you run a proposal or after you draw up a contract or something like that, and you'll always be able to insert additional information in here as well. Like in my case, I've got it set up so that my company's letterhead automatically inserts whenever I generate a proposal, and then it's just a matter of going through and touching up a couple of these last little things that I either want or don't want, depending on how we generate the proposal. You'll also notice in this proposal that some of the information is going to be automatically populated based on the details that I've assigned to this document. So on the document itself, I said that this was part of the project Simpson TI. So it's pulling in all the details from the Simpson project, like the project primary address, which includes a street address, city, state, zip. Above this, we've got the date field and the year field. So March 1st is the date, the year is 2016, and those automatically populate as well. And then below that is my company information. Schaefer Brothers Construction, 2272 Moores Mill Road. Looks like we're working in the same place here. But ultimately, this just puts together most of the information for it. And this, for me, has always acted as the cover sheet. When I set this down on my customer's desk, I want them to know first and foremost who they're working with, who's provided the details for the job, and which project it is that we're talking about. This is extremely handy if you're ever working with somebody who has multiple possibilities for projects, and it just makes it look a little bit more professional because you're presenting them with a better setup than just a yellow piece of paper that has scribble all over it from your legal pad or anything. So put together something like this, and then as you get down into the body of the proposal, some of the information will be repeated. Here's the owner of the unit that we're working on. Here's my company information again, with whatever you guys want to include in this. And then it dives into the scope, which we put something in there, special conditions, which we have information for as well, and here is that all-important project totals with my notes. You can see the little notes here under site work, for example, and footers labor and stuff like this. But as I mentioned before, when you do the comparison between the estimate and the proposal, the proposal has similar information. Starting with planning, and under planning I've got design services, there it is. No price tag, I chose to hide that. Permits with notes, there's a little notes icon over to the left of this. Lot costs, construction financing, and then it gives me the subtotal for planning. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this number is going to be a little bit higher because we prorated in the company overhead margin, and you can see in the proposal itself, there's no indication that we did this. That's just how much planning cost, no substructure or anything like that, so the client isn't going to be able to go out and shop their own footers, for example, or anything like that. They just see that total for foundation is going to be $23,000, almost $24,000. That's just how much it costs. But it still does a great job of giving them the indicator that we're looking out for them by outlining everything that's going to be included, and any notes or anything like that that you guys have wanted to include will be in here as well. And as I said before, you can just go in here and change around any of the information or text. It looks like I accidentally clicked on one of the styles to change the information around as well. But you can always flip-flop things like that too. If you guys ever want to make any changes, you can always do so. So let's see, what other options do you guys have here? Of course, just like with Word, if it ever finds anything that appears to be misspelled, it will give you the little red squiggles underneath it, and then you can always just right-click and add it to the dictionary as needed. It gives you some additional information here to work with as well for all the different subsections and what have you. At the end of my proposal, we've also got that acceptance of agreement, which kind of works as my notice to proceed. But again, you can just go through and touch up a couple of things in here. There you go. So once again, there it is. Okay, quick question. Why does it merge all the activity information where it shows the edit date, time, and person edited by? Is there not a way to show that internal information? Okay, that one, I might need to come back to that question in a minute, because I don't know if I'm sharing the same screen that you are, or maybe if I just don't follow along. Perhaps it's this. But this might be a little bit of a different section, so I'll come back and revisit that question here shortly. This is actually part of the notes that we put together, and in entering notes in there, there's an option to put in a timestamp in your initials with it. So this is just part of the notes section itself. If you guys ever wanted to include that, that's exactly how it shows up. If you don't want to include it, it's something that would not have been inserted when the notes came in. So again, personal option in the estimate, and as you go through and take a look at that notes section, you'll see where that's going to go in there when you're putting those notes in. Now, as you see here, I'm just going through and highlighting it and removing it because I don't really need that piece of information. Sometimes you can do this with various different areas, and when you're setting up the details for the proposal itself, if you edit the template, you can predefine some of these changes. For me, there's other areas in here as well that I've adjusted. Some of the blue information up here at the top, for example, these are AutoDoc fields, and some of the AutoDoc fields that I've removed because I just don't want them as part of my proposal would include things like my fax number under the company information. I just right-click and get rid of that field. You can do it here as well. Just right-click and delete the field, and that way it's not there anymore. If you wanted to add in a different field, however, you can come up to the Tools menu, and you've got three major headings for these fields. The three major headings on these fields include the contact fields, which in my case for the proposal would be client information. You can come in here and pull just about anything from the client's details that you would want. It's going to be job information, billing information, shipping information, work number, home number, whatever it is. Even any custom contact information that you put together for your clients, you can put those in as auto-populating fields here as well. And apparently I pulled from somebody else because here I've got hundreds, it looks like. But it can be anything that you want. You can put in anything under the sun. You'll be able to see the same thing as you go into project fields. We've got the project's address, we've got opportunity information, there's custom fields and things like that here as well. And for the company information, again, same thing, third time over. This is going to be my company information, doing business as, all of my company address or licensing information, owner details and fax numbers and things like that as well. So all of that detail is going to be in here as well. And on this AutoDoc section, right here in the very middle of the Tools tab, you've also got extra entries for the date field and the year field. Now, most of these are going to be AutoDoc fields, and our goal has always been to try to draw attention to things like this so that you can verify the details in these areas and make sure that the information is right. You'll actually see this if you go back to the ConstructionSuite main interface and take a look under the Contracts and Docs portion. When you get to Contracts and Docs, you'll see under the Document Templates tab a full listing for all the different contract and document templates that we offer. For those of you using the standard or light versions of ConstructionSuite, you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 different templates to work with, 141 contract and document templates. As you step up to the Pro and Contractor version of ConstructionSuite, this number increases to 176, I believe. And when you move up to the corporate and developer versions of ConstructionSuite and above, the number jumps to 205. So what you'll find in here is tons and tons of different options that cover just about everything under the sun, and you're going to be well set up for things like fixed fee contracts or cost plus contracts. For some of the jobs that you do, there's additional conditions and addenda like mold disclosure agreements and lead paint documentation and everything like that. There's an inspection checklist in here and finish schedules. You've got architectural contracts and design build agreements in here, draw requests and lien release forms, both conditional and unconditional. So you've got plenty of documentation in for that as well. We've even got over 60 different subcontractor contracts in here for everything from just a general subcontractor contract all the way through metalwork and bathrooms and exterior finishes and roofers and all sorts of specialty trades. So take a look through this. There's plenty of different options in here for you guys as well. All of these are also customizable. If you just right-click and edit templates, well, you won't be able to save over our contract. We always want to make sure that you've got the original to work with. You can right-click and edit any of these and save them as new contracts, maybe even put them into your own little subfolder. And this way, you're never going to need to worry about having all the information that you need. Oh, that's the wrong one. You're never going to have to worry about having all the information that you guys need. And it's going to be very specific to each of you and your companies as well. Now, the nice thing about these contracts is, right out of the box, they are ready and legally binding for just about anybody who's going to be using them. Sometimes we do have to put together specialized content for certain areas. I know California has a specialized content package, which you can download by going back to ConstructionSuite, go up to the Tools menu, go to ConstructionSuite Options, and take a look under Specialized Content. There's an area to download the California-specific contracts and addendas. But for everything else, you'll be able to come in here and work with the existing information and make whatever changes that you guys like. Once again, this information is all going to be customizable, and we offer a lot of AutoDoc fields here as well, like company address, contact information, project information. Other areas, though, we use the blue text to represent information that you need to come into and fill in for yourselves, or verify the details for on your own. So keep in mind, whenever you're generating a contract, all you need to do is double-click on the contract, and it will open up and ask you to save it into a project, as this one had. You'll also be able to select the customer and project by going up to the page layout and set up the document wizard to select your contact information for this contract and your project information for this contract, and then it'll fill in all those AutoDoc fields. From there, you just need to come through and find all the blue text and put in the value that belongs here. So how many days are the contractor agrees to pay the subcontractor within so many days? In my case, it might be the 10th of each month for the previous month's work. But in this case, we might put in stipulations that the payment has to be submitted to us by the end of each month. So the payment terms are going to dictate that kind of relationship. Time to complete is going to be outlined by the subcontractor, and if they don't finish within a certain number of days of the end of their scheduled section, then this will outline what happens. And again, you just kind of builds on that, all this information. So go in, take a look at the information available, and fill in whatever it is that you guys need to fill in, and then save this under the File menu, Save as Template, and this will give you a new template for you guys to work with as well. Now, the other nice thing to this is it's going to go through and outline some of this information as it pertains to this project or general projects or anything like that, but the blue information, the blue text, doesn't look as professional, so you can always go up and hit the Page Layout tab again, and this time convert all of the blue text to black as soon as this is ready to send out to your clients, so or to your subcontractors or whoever this contract might be going to. So make sure that you do that before you send it out. Get everything else in order for it, and then you can email it as an attachment, which just allows you to send it out exactly as is in a PDF. You can also export it as a a Word document or a PDF or something like that. Here you've got a couple of different export options. So if you've got this contract and you want to send it to your legal team or your legal counsel and just have them review it and send it back to you, great. When they do send it back, you can import it right back again. Importing from Word documents or PDFs or anything like that is a really easy function that allows you to create a new template or insert it into an existing template and merge any changes that they might have made. Furthermore, last and probably best option, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail on Friday again, you can always take all the work that you guys have done, both in estimates and in contracts and reports, and save this information to ConstructionOnline. Every file menu for On Cost, On Point, and On Plan has an option here to publish the information to ConstructionOnline. It takes advantage of one of those Total Care features called SuiteLink in order to do so, but as long as you guys have Total Care in place and SuiteLink is active, and as long as you guys have any ConstructionOnline account to upload the information into, you'll be able to take that and put it into the cloud to share with your customers and subcontractors and even on your own field personnel, so that they can take advantage of all of this information, this time that you guys have put together, creating very professional looking estimates and proposals and contracts and everything like that as well. Now with that, I've realized that we kind of went on a little bit long, and by we, I mean I, obviously. But this is actually going to wrap up most of the information that I have for you guys today. Don't forget, as you're going through and working with a lot of this information, the more time you spend putting together a solid estimate with all of your categories, your subcategories, and your items in there, the more time you spend on that, the less time you're going to have to spend estimating on every job moving forward. It's also a really important piece to make sure that you get as much content into those estimate templates as possible, because you don't ever want to miss anything. And since you don't have to delete anything, you've just got this one little button under the View menu to hide everything that didn't get used, there's no reason not to have everything in there. You'll also be able to take advantage of all the reporting capabilities to pull the valuable information out for proposals, for labor reports and material lists and purchase orders and things like that too. So do be detailed as you're putting it together, and keep in mind when the information goes over to QuickBooks, you have plenty of options on how to summarize that. We'll talk about the setup and the summarization process tomorrow as we go through QuickBooks integration. I promise that one's going to be faster. A little bit of a shorter webinar tomorrow. But for now, though, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Once again, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies. We have just gone over everything under the sun for estimating, reporting, and contracts. If you guys do have any follow-up questions, though, please stick around for a little bit. I'll answer as many of those as I can with the time that we have left. And if you need anything else, you can always reach out to us by going up to ConstructionSuite's help menu. Take a look under the contact information, and you guys will find phone numbers, email addresses, and a number of other ways to reach out to us should you need any further assistance. For now, though, guys, I'm going to go ahead and let you go for the afternoon. Don't forget to join us tomorrow at 3 o'clock Central if you guys are interested in taking a look at the QuickBooks integration webinar. It's certainly a great one, and our QuickBooks Pro advisors here on staff have a lot of wonderful recommendations for you guys as you go through and you set up your integration or work with it for the first time. Or even for those of you who have been using it for a long time and you guys just want to make sure that you hone in on some of the better practices there. But make sure that you take a look at that, guys. And until then, hopefully you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much again for joining me today, guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great night.